All right, today on FERMAT Fridays, we got an interesting one. Usually we have members of the FERMAT team. Usually we have a FERMAT customer. But I've got a special guest for everyone. I've got Sarah Levinger, who is a consumer behavior strategist, consulting under her own name. And I really wanted to get Sarah on the show because her Twitter takes are great. She's always talking about the emotion behind things, consumer psychology. And I just thought that was the perfect person to bring on the show. Talk all about consumer psychology, maybe a little bit participation marketing. We'll just kind of see where the conversation goes, Sarah. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. I'm excited to chat today, especially because the before chat, like the green room chat, has been really good. So I'm like, this is going to be interesting. Thank you for having me.
Interesting and weird, and it's a Friday. It's FERMAT Fridays. We're recording on a Friday afternoon. We'll see. We'll see what happens here. So
it's gonna be good.
Sarah, I think maybe the best place to start is maybe just like consumer psychology. Like obviously you're super passionate about this and its application to direct to consumer. Maybe just kind of give me like the overall pitch of like why should a D2C brand listening care about consumer psychology?
I mean, other than the fact that we are humans selling to humans, so that's kind of a huge part of business. I would say, especially when it comes to consumer psychology, understanding what actually influences the purchasing process, the actual behavior of purchasing products, like bringing them to your house and consuming them, is kind of a big deal. Mostly because very few people offer training on this. It's actually something that's difficult to get. And even the people in the industry that I've talked to that have a psychology background, like they went to school for business with an undergrad in psychology, most of them say the same thing over and over, which is, I don't know how to apply it. I have all of this knowledge about the psychology of humans. Nobody is teaching us how to apply it. So
what is absolutely hilarious is I have a business degree with a minor in psychology. So
you're like smirking over there. I was like, he must have a psychology degree. That's amazing. Yeah, it's a real thing. And it's very common in this industry. I've met a lot of marketers in paid performance that have psychology undergrads. And I'm like, so how's that working for you? Like, does it help? Is it helpful? And their answer is almost always, nope. Don't use it at all.
It's so funny because I feel like if you go to school for marketing, the psychology, like having a psychology component is like such an applicable thing for marketing, but you're right. I feel like a lot of times it ends up just like, I'd say like most of my psychology classes weren't necessarily about the things that are going to be helpful for marketing. I feel like most of my marketing psychology has just come from like reading something like Influence or reading something like reading that type of self-education side of this to like on the application. But okay, so we're humans. We buy from humans. Consumer behavior, obviously like a big part in this. And like one thing you said there that I don't know if like there's more to it is like, hey, when you buy something, you take it home, you start to consume this, like that's actually like a pretty big deal for D2C brands because like I don't actually get to touch the thing. I don't get to smell the thing. I don't get to taste the thing. It is just some digitized thing on the internet that I have to buy and then wait to get.
Yep. 100%. And there's something interesting to be said about the fact that as marketers, we have beliefs, very deep-seated ones, around how people purchase things and about our ability to influence those purchases that kind of contradict how humans actually work. So I try to be very gentle with people and just say, maybe question everything you believe because that's not quite how humans work. But yes, behavior is such a huge piece of this that very few people spend the time to learn because, again, depending on your product, specifically if you're in a product that has to be consumed, like actually ingested, there's a huge piece of that that comes into play when people purchase inside an e-commerce ecosystem. Because if you have to ingest something, your number one concern is, am I going to get poisoned? Because that's just a biological response. So anybody in the supplement industry, anybody that does anything in like coffees or, like mud water, anything in like anything where you have to ingest a product, you have to think about behavior because at the end of the day, humans can't help some of these behaviors that just come out. And if you're worried about being poisoned, the color of the powder might be a deterrent, depending on what color it is. The smell of the powder, probably a deterrent. Now, none of these things that they can really tell online, but these are the type of things that they're subconsciously checking for in your images, in your descriptions, The price comes heavily into play. Like everything that you do in your ecosystem comes down to how the brain is processing that information. So it's massively important.
You said there, like, hey, a lot of times we as marketers, we have kind of like preconceived notions on
Yeah.
how people are going to buy, and there's a lot of contradictions. Like, do you have any examples of those contradictions? Like, I'm assuming you talk to people all the time, and it's like, oh, well, we know, and then you're like, but do you really know?
Yeah, that's like 100% what I do on a daily basis. I have a lot of people who like ask me, so you're a consumer behavior strategist. Does that mean that you're teaching people how to use like social proof, authority proof, urgency, scarcity in their ads? No. Nope. That's not what I do. Because most marketers know how to do that and do that well. That comes down to
Yeah, it's a
being able to
solved game at this point,
utilize.
I think,
Yeah,
in ads.
we know that it works. So I don't need to teach you how to do that, right? So one of the things that I've noticed most recently is marketers have this deep-seated belief that everything that we do somehow influences the purchasing process, and specifically for younger generations, that's just not true. The older generations, it was a little bit more applicable, specifically because they didn't really have access to the massive amounts of information that we have access to now. So if you were a boomer and, growing up in like 70s, 80s, your access to information came through radio, television, newspaper, those type of things that was very controlled, right? So all of the like the agencies got to decide what information you got. Now you can go very quickly within the span of 20 minutes and figure out whether what a brand is saying on their website is actually true in the consumer form. Meaning, if a brand says, we have thousands of people that say our whatever tastes good, and you go over to TikTok and you see like 5 different people say it tastes nasty, you're going to believe them. Not necessarily what the brand thinks. So, wrapping that back, like, I think most marketers have grown up with this idea that somehow what I'm doing is influencing a person's decision process, when it's actually kind of the other way around. The influencer, like the actual consumers, are influencing what the marketers do more than we influence each other. So I try and keep that in mind when I'm going through and doing these kind of like consultancy stuff, because it's intense. Very intense.
So from like a marketing perspective in a D2C scenario, like 1000% agreed. Like there's just so much information out there right
Yeah.
now. And I think like one really cool thing that has come of this is like the sense of community can be like much
Yeah.
smaller and like way more specific than it would have been in the past, where it's like, oh, I'm into like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of, I'm a weirdo and I'm like a big Disney fan, but like I'm a Disney parks fan, specifically Walt Disney World. And like maybe in the past I would have been like, oh yeah, other Disney fans. But now I'm like, no, like other Disney fans like aren't, that's not my tribe. Like I need like Walt Disney World nerds, Like it's just, you can niche down so far in like where I'm consuming this information that like nothing's like on things I care about and things I want to consume, nothing's a secret. Like
Nope.
I know everything.
Yeah. We're extremely well-informed consumers, which is a good thing and a bad thing. Because again, as a brand, you're trying really hard to create a whole experience around your products that will help people understand that you're better than everybody else in the industry, so that you can compete and stay at the top. Toughest part about that, though, is like, again, people have so much information on you, on your competitors, on anybody that's in your ecosystem and industry. It's very difficult to compete, because what you can prove, your competitors can also prove in some capacity. And I see this a ton when I get on consulting calls, is there's almost always a competitor brand that's saying almost the exact same thing as the brand I'm consulting for. And this is why I keep telling people, you got to sell emotion. Emotion is the one thing they can't take away from you. Because once you start to sell it, and once you're known for that specific emotion, nobody will think anybody else could do it as well as you can.
When you say sell emotion, what does that mean to you? So like say brands listening right now, like, and 1000% agree. It's like this particular function can definitely be something that like other brands can talk about. But like, what does getting to the emotion mean to you? Like you can pick like any fake product you want, or I guess real product if you want to talk about it, and like let's start to talk about the emotion behind a product.
Yeah. So I always use this example every single time, so I need to pick a different one. Liquid Death is probably the easiest brand to bring up just because they sell emotion incredibly well. But
Yep.
just to challenge myself on this podcast, because I'm sure people have heard me talk about Liquid Death, they're like, geez, Sarah, a different example. I think probably one of the other good one was Dos Equis. So Dos Equis did an entire like decade long worth campaign around the most interesting man in the world. And that was entirely kind of on accident. They were, if you've read the story of Dos Equis and how they came up with this, they worked with an agency that came up with this campaign. And the gentleman that came in to actually audition for that particular role, he was up against all these other like younger guys who were like, very good looking, whatever. And he came in and started basically just riffing these one-liners. That was like, I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I drink Dos Equis type of a thing. But then he started like rolling with it and doing all of these very strange one-liners around like, I used to fight an octopus in the ocean, but I let him win so he would feel better about himself. Like weird things like that just didn't make any sense, right? But the way he delivered the line had all of the guys at the agency just saying, oh my, like, I want to be this dude. And that I find really interesting because Dos Equis is a beer. Like you drink it mostly because you're socially trying to either fit in with people that you're currently drinking with, or just because like it's something that you genuinely enjoy. So technically speaking, Dos Equis could have gone the route to say this is an enjoyable beer. You're going to enjoy it with your friends. Enjoyment is great. Enjoyment. That is an emotion, but it's a superficial one. Instead, they went with this agency who hired a guy who literally looks like the epitome of human, and everybody wanted to be him. So they went after a deeper emotion, right? Which was this idea of elevated status. They went after esteem instead of just going after enjoyment. So knowing what you sell is like freaking integral to business growth. And every single brand that I've seen that has grown rapidly knows what they sell emotionally and they never deviate from it.
That Dos Equis is such a good example because like everyone think when that most interesting man in the world campaign came out, people thought Dos Equis was a new brand. It was
Yes.
not a new
They were
brand.
like,
it had been
"Who
around
is
for
this?"
like decades.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And Dos Equis is the one too that once they found this, right? They ran with it. Like they got so incredibly hooked on this like most interesting man in the world idea that he just became prevalent everywhere. They ran him on the Super Bowl. He was on all kinds of billboards. He was inside social media ads. And people just genuinely liked the character. And I need to look this up. I was just doing some research today on this. This is something, what do they call it? A fluent device. A fictitious character or like characters created by a brand used as a primary vehicle for like drama, right? Inside an ad, a fluent device. I've never heard of this before. Fantastic. I just love learning new psychology things. But this guy is technically a fluent device. He's a character. He's just a character that the brand made up, but it fits so incredibly well with the emotional message that they were trying to convey, which was if you want to be the most interesting man in the world, you'll drink Dos Equis. And a lot of people want to be that. So it worked. Oh, it worked so well.
Selling stuff like they were selling sophistication, right? Like
Yes.
beer is such a good category to choose to talk about this too because like you can't sell features with beer. Like let's be real, it's all the same shit. Like beer is beer, right? It is fully a brand play. And like I can only think of one beer company, which is weird because they've kind of like gone the opposite route where they're like, we're going to be known for a function, and that's Coors Light, right? Like it is the coldest beer. Like, no, it's as cold as you make it yourself. But like, what a weird functional thing to chase. But every other brand of beer has to get you to feel a certain way. Holding that can needs to represent something about yourself. And like for probably like a decade, holding a Dos Equis at a party meant you were sophisticated. You weren't here to be like a frat boy. You weren't here to be, I don't know, anything, all these other emotions. I'm an interesting guy. I drink Dos Equis.
It's fascinating too what you can do with emotion if you know how to frame it correctly, right? So like some of the quotes that he had, when I drive a car off the lot, its price increases in value. Right? Just like that's so relatable because everybody knows that the price of a car goes down the second you drive it off a lot, right? I once went to a psychic to warn her. Just like they were taking real world experiences of people that like they were marketing to and just flipping them upside down. And it worked so incredibly well because, and I talk about this a ton, the best thing you can do in any sort of ad or brand ecosystem is to produce something that's relatable. I don't necessarily need to see bizarre things anymore, unique things anymore. It's very difficult to actually do novelty well. You would do better as a brand to go relatable over novel. Novel's very hard to do like correctly. But relatable is the easiest thing ever. Like this, I mean, they have hundreds of these little tiny one-liners for this guy. And as you said, they were selling sophistication in a market where this kind of like, I don't what you would call it, like drunken fool was kind of the norm for beer advertising. It was very normal to kind of have this like silly dude where he was just screaming into the phone saying, "What's that?" Like that was
I
the
was thinking
general
about that
norm.
exact same ad.
Yes. That's the exact like competitive subgroup that they were working in emotionally. And so going after the sophistication of I'm above that was huge for Dos Equis. And again, every brand that I've seen do really well has chosen an emotion like this, a deep one, and then just ran hard at it. So yeah, God, Dos Equis, I love them.
So, man, Liquid Death is also such a strong one. I see why you bring that one up all
I
the time.
try
But
not
like,
to use it because I'm like, this is the best one ever. But yes, I could talk about Liquid Death all day long.
so like building on an emotion. So I feel like some people listening right now might be like, okay, like Liquid Death is like just this massive brand now. Dos Equis, like these are brands that have like potential to have like Super Bowl
Yep.
spots.
Yeah.
So when we kind of like scope this down to like, let's say like a Shopify brand or like a direct to consumer brand, like how does you use the word emotional ecosystem a few lines ago? Like how do I go about building? Like how do I choose what emotion I want to go after, and like how do I build that ecosystem with like the tools I have in front of me? Because I feel like like the main tool set for a direct to consumer brand right now is like meta ads. But like maybe
Yeah.
you're saying like, oh, that's not actually the play. But like, what's this ecosystem
Yeah.
look like? Like, how do I go do this?
Yeah. So there's twofold to this. I usually like to test emotions inside the ad ecosystem first, mostly because advertising is the cheapest, fastest way to see whether or not the emotion you want to be selling is working, right? So I use a process of natural language processing and like a little bit of linguistic analysis, basically, to pull down as many reviews off of the brand website that I'm working for and categorize them into 9 different emotions. This is a psychology model based on Will Leach, his work. He's a consumer behavior analyst as well. He also does a ton of stuff, and like he's an economist, but he does a ton of stuff for big brand like Pepsi and Frito Lay and yada yada. Will, fantastic. Mentor, really good friend of mine. Shout out to Will. So his ecosystem, like the psychology model that he used, was specifically for consumer surveys. Like he would sit down and actually talk and do interviews. I kind of took it and said maybe I could do this for ads. So I take down these reviews, categorize them into these 9 different emotional categories, and I can tell pretty quickly, based upon frequency numbers, which emotion the customer is using pre-purchase, not post, but pre. So from there, I can, just reading down through these reviews, we can pretty quickly tell, okay, if you're, a beauty brand who sells like confidence, we need to figure out what type of confidence you sell. It's a lot easier to go about it that way than just guessing. Like, I think we sell this, right? If you're a supplement brand, are you selling for nurturance? Like people actually want to, give self-love to themselves and nurture their own health? Or are you selling achievement where they're trying to actually achieve a specific goal? Which one are you selling? Now, the interesting part about this is that's like step 1. Trying to figure out which emotion is currently hitting is step 1. Now, most of the time when I'm doing these consulting calls and running NLP reports and running ads for people, we will hone in on one specific emotion, right? That it's this one: belonging, nurturance, security, whatever it is. From there, I have to work with the brands over the course of a couple weeks to decide, is that the emotion you want to sell? That's the one that's currently working, but that may not be what you want to sell. For instance, Liquid Death. In this particular market, they had a competitor. Aquafina was selling canned water for quite a long time at like sporting events and all kinds of things. And they were going after eco-friendly angle. Eco-friendly goes deep into kind of like social responsibility. Lots of
Yep.
nurturance focused over there, right? But it's a difficult angle to sell. Anybody that tries to sell eco-friendly, I try and push them in a different direction because the, you have to find a market who's highly attuned to social responsibility, which is difficult to do if the economy is down and they can't pay for groceries. So you have to think about behavior, but you also have to think about, again, is this the emotion we want to sell? So Liquid Death was wicked smart and came in with this idea of we want to sell an emotion that's going to work across a multitude of people that people can attach an identity to instead of just attaching kind of, like a problem solving behavior to, if that makes sense.
It does. And like the way you framed like a few things there, like when you were talking about supplements, it's like, oh, is it nurturing? And then I'm like, oh, what's the opposite of this? And in my head, I'm like performance. And then you said achievement. I'm like, no, okay, performance isn't an emotion. Performance is an outcome. And that's like every supplement brand is going to be selling performance. But if I can sell achievement, that is interesting, right? And I love the Liquid Death thing too, because like I'm not wearing it right now. I have a Liquid Death hat, and like, who doesn't have Liquid Death merch right now? And it's like the same thing is, yeah, I can go be drinking a can of Liquid Death, but like owning the merch says something about me.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, like, I don't know.
About me.
I'm fun. I don't take myself too seriously. Like, I want people to ask me about this thing because I want them to ask, like, what the heck are you wearing?
Where's that?
Right?
Like, get that hat? Yeah. Everything comes down to identity as a person, mostly based upon like how the brain processes things and how humans actually create identity. Identity is built on quite a few different like sub-level psychology things. But for the most part, identity comes down to how you want other people to perceive you, like you just said. Like, how do I want to be perceived? And most of the time, that's a subconscious thing, right? So like Sarah's got a lot of plants and things. Like my office looks like a therapist office. Kind of on purpose. Now, I didn't sit here and think I want my office to look like a therapy office, but it came out this way because I have a specific vision that I want people to see when they see my office. And same goes for almost everybody's office. You start to put things in that you like, but for the most part, especially if you're going to be on Zoom calls, you want the background to look a specific way so people perceive you in a specific way. It's the same for purchasing products from a brand.
All right, before I go any further here, what does my office say about me?
I find it interesting that you have black walls. Your office has dark walls.
It is dark blue, not black.
Yeah. Okay, it looks black.
But it comes off black in the video here. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like this yellow chair says something about me. I'm like,
yes,
I don't know. Maybe
you have a yellow chair with dark blue walls. The other thing that I noticed too is you have industrial looking shelves. They're not wood. They're metal.
They're not. They are metal.
That's very interesting. Again, I'm sitting here like studying people all day long. So I'm like, why is that happening? So interesting. Why'd you choose metal instead of wood? Like I have wood everywhere in my office because I really enjoy the medium of it. It's much more, what's the word? I don't know, like earthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But metal says something specific about you. Stable. Stability. Right? I told you, I can analyze anybody. It's fascinating stuff, though. And this is the interesting part, too. We're just talking about your office and what you have in it. But if you can do the same thing for consumers and you can take like just like a little bird's eye view into their ecosystems, their homes, their families, like, even just through a survey, you can find things out about what people value very quickly that you can use fairly easily to connect better. And that's what I'm trying to do. Because again, you can take psychology and use it very unethically, very easily. And I'm trying really hard to remind people that like we don't want to manipulate people into purchasing things that they don't want or don't need. All I'm trying to do is connect. Humans are so well connected and incredibly lonely right now. Like this is one of the highest periods in history of loneliness ever, which is shocking considering how easy it is to talk to people anywhere in the world at any time of the day, no matter what you're doing. So because we have this disconnection in a highly connected world issue, I really want marketers to think harder about what you're saying, because if you connect to the wrong emotion, you can do worlds of damage, not just to the brand, but also to consumers. You got to be real careful with it.
When you said connecting to an emotion, earlier you said like, hey, I like to go take a look at the site, look at the reviews. Like, what's the sentiment of the existing customer base? Like, can we nail down an emotion that is like potentially working right now? And then you said, but is that what they want? And like, I think that's really interesting because like sometimes something has led a brand to like, I don't know how to word this, but I'm just going to say like dead end, right? It's like, I feel like I've maximized what I can do here. And like that, I feel like the first time that's going to happen is everything we're talking about at the beginning of this. Like I'm selling a particular feature, like you will max that out pretty quick. But like say, hey, you moved into this emotion, like, hey, people are talking about it this way and I want to go do something else. Like, how do you go about potentially changing that, seeing if that's a good idea? You're talking about like testing at the ad level, but like I guess one thing I may be worried about is I go and try like a new emotional hooks, but then they end up on my site and my site's kind of like, I don't know, feature based, old emotion, old way of thinking. Like, do you run into this?
Yes. And this is why I always caveat that with like, I think it's important to test emotion in ads because it's quick. It's quick wins. You can see just through metrics, basically, very quickly if this is working or not. The secondary step to it, though, is to decide what kind of brand do you want to be. Brands have personalities just like humans do. And I always take this back to best example, like which high school like trope is your brand? Is she the cheerleader? Is he the football player? Is he the loner? Is he the art kid? Like, is he the band geek? Is she like, who are they? Who is your brand? Because having that idea in your head will make it so much easier for you to start developing marketing that speaks to the emotion that you actually want people to identify with. So what you're talking about, like hitting a cap basically, or hitting like some sort of ceiling, usually happens at very specific growth levels in a brand. I've seen it happen almost always at about 10 million. Once you get past 1 million is hard. Getting to 10 is like a freaking slog. It's just difficult to get there. You hit 10 and I find people struggle to get past that. You hit 25, people struggle to get past that. You hit 50, very difficult to get past 50 million. After 50 million, it seems to get a little bit easier because you have notoriety, you have familiarity built into the ecosystem. People just know you exist, so it's easier. But during that like particular time period, people struggle and struggle and struggle because we're focused on growth level marketing, not brand level marketing. Which is
and
two
I
totally
think
different.
that's a
need
huge
both.
distinction, right?
But
yeah, and like I think that's why so many people like that $10 million mark I think is a really good one because like I think that's the point at which direct response marketing, you've kind of like tapped it, right? Like I have picked my niche and I have gotten that group to buy as much as like I have hit everyone in that group. And then like you can either go one of two ways. Is like, how do I expand out of this or how do I get more from that existing group? And like getting more, like retention's hard and retention's like kind of dependent on your product. But like I would argue that that 10 million mark is like I've nailed direct response marketing. And in order to grow past that point, I need to get out of direct response marketing. So like for you, what's that level up? Like, how do I go from like, I'm doing I just do direct response right now. We've been talking a lot about brand. Like, what's this new, like, how do I get past there? What is that type of marketing?
I come at it from a weird standpoint. Almost everybody will be like, well, you just need to hire more influencers, right? You need to expand your marketing channels, go omni-channel. Like you need all that, like maybe try retail, like try all these different things. I agree to a point. And clearly I'm not an operator or like a business growth professional. I do psychology. However, in my experience, I truly believe it comes down to how well, again, can you kind of like sell an emotion inside whatever it is you're currently working on. This kind of comes down to understanding which generation you're selling to and then understanding what that generation craves more than anything else. So I think the majority of the time we have to identify one specific generation that you are like interested in selling to. Almost everybody's going to say, well, we can sell to anybody. We can sell to everybody between the ages of 25 and 65. And I'm like, well, that's a lot. That's a lot of humans. And a lot of humans have a lot of emotions. It's going to be very difficult to sell to that. I, on the other hand, like to sell to one specific generation. So millennials, Gen Xers, boomers, Gen Zers, Gen Alpha, whichever one you want to pick, because it's a lot easier for me to understand what marketing tactics I need to use next. Because if we're building brand, really good example, um, Dollar Shave Club came straight out the gate as fast as they could, and they hit the humor angle as quickly as possible. Now, they had a good product and they had great offer, right? Cheap as chips, really good razors. Definitely better than what Gillette was doing, even though Gillette had literal decades of longevity built into their brand, but Gillette was going straight after esteem. Again, once you go after an emotion for a long time, you become known for that emotion. It's very difficult to deviate a big ship. So they were literally trying to compete with somebody that had a 10-year brand built, and they were very smart about it because, again, younger generations do not have brand loyalty. It's not built into their like DNA like it is for the older generations. Boomers are very brand loyal. Once they find a brand, that's my brand. If I'm going to shave, it's only going to be Gillette, nothing else. If you're a millennial or younger, especially, you don't have brand loyalty because you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
It's not required. It's not like there's not another brand that I could just go to. So Dollar Shave Club came straight out the gate with several, like one in particular, but several different ads that hit on like just bizarre funny. They had some, like their CEO was just like walking through the warehouse, talking to a guy in a stuffed bear costume, like pushing his employees in a cart. Like it was just the strangest thing ever. And he was just hitting on the key points. We're cheap. We're very, very good. You can get it for $1. It'll get shipped to your house. There it is, right? Now, I find this interesting because from a brand perspective, technically speaking, they weren't hitting on anything deeper other than accomplishment, right? And humor. They just combined two of them together, but no other brand in the industry was trying to sell that emotion. And that's why it hit so incredibly well. So I digress. If you're a brand and you're trying to figure out what should we sell, very first thing you should do, look and see what your competitors are selling. Because 99% of the time, they're all selling the same thing. They think they're selling different things, but they're not. Emotionally, they're usually selling the exact same thing that everyone else is. And if you're trying to get past 10 million, pick a different emotion and sell that.
It's so funny. So I don't know if you've read this book. There's a book called Different. I think it's by Youngmi Moo. I'll put the author. I'll put the book in the show notes. But it's basically like on the cover is a white dog and a black dog looking at each other and being like, "Oh, I need to be more like the other brand." And then you just get like they both become Dalmatians, and then like it's unrecognizable. Like
Yep.
I can't choose, right? And
Yeah.
I think one of the best examples of this is like if you go to CVS, like choose your pharmacy and go to like the body wash aisle. Remember in men's body wash when having a dark package made you stand out? Like Axe came out with
Yeah.
having that dark package and it was like,
Oh my
we're
God.
edgy, like we're different.
Crushed
And
it.
like
Yep.
they crushed it. But now I go down that aisle and it's interesting because now
Every single one.
Native is the one that stands out because Native has the
Yeah.
white, like minimalistic, like, oh, like all like we're not hard, like it's not
Yeah.
the eco angle you were talking about before, but it's like maybe it's like more nurturing in an
Yes.
aisle full of like rah beat my chest masculinity.
Yeah.
All of a sudden that stands out.
Yes. Well, and that it goes to show you, especially for brands who are currently like just rising to the top of everybody else based on packaging, it goes to show you what behavior is actually connected to, because the millennials right now at least are very intensely focused on identity, specifically when it comes to gender, sexuality, like, you know, being an original version of yourself. The millennials were the very first to kind of like push that rhetoric forward and become very focused on being pro identity, right? Now, the the millennials had the Gen Zers, and the Gen Zers took it and like pushed it way up. So Axe was coming up in a time where Gen Xers were very concerned and like involved in being a very specific type of person. They actually valued that masculinity heavily. Millennials, not so much. So you have to know what the generations want. And that's the reason why Native did as well as they did. Now I'm seeing that Native is currently struggling a tiny bit. Like they're not quite sure where their position is because they built everything off of like packaging and ingredients. If they were to go after some sort of a deeper emotion, I think they could break past that ceiling and just crush, because they're in a good spot to start doing really well. So gotta know. You have to know. Important.
All right. We talked about choosing an emotion, talked about the ceilings, the limitations. So one thing that you and I, when you're talking about like the green room before, and I think just like your kind of personal brand out there, like this concept of like, yes, direct response marketing, that is it still works, but it like it's on a timeline, I think.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
what's next? You've talked about participation marketing. And like
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make sure I gave you time to say like what is participation marketing? Why should everyone care?
I I'm gonna get some flack for this one. Um, I grew up in like direct response, like in my 20s, especially because we were just at the cusp of long form sales pages and direct response advertising. And Dan Kennedy was like a huge feature in that. Russell Brunson and everything he did with ClickFunnels, it was all focused on direct response, right? Getting that particular behavior to happen. Um, I think it worked really well for boomers and Gen Xers. Again, I think they were already kind of primed for that because they didn't grow up in technology. And so this was a brand new world for them. They were like, oh my gosh, they started to evolve through the direct response ecosystems we were setting up. And it worked really well for what they needed was direction. Millennials, Gen Zers don't want to be told what to do. That particular group of people is really into self-love, self-care. Like I said, identity is very important, but also validating what they feel in their in their daily lives. They're very big on validation, specifically the millennials. So outside of that like feeling of I don't really need anybody to tell me who I am or what to do, they also have this other odd behavior where they want to be more involved in every aspect of every piece of their lives. And this is where this kind of like participation marketing comes in. Now, I can't take credit for this. I read it in a book. I don't know which book it was. I need to go back and check and see which author was talking about this. But he was talking about the fact that like participation marketing is different than engagement marketing, which is what we've been in so long. We just want people to respond. Marketers just want a response. And that's what direct response was supposed to do. And it did it very well. It's not working as well anymore because the new group of consumers doesn't want to respond. They want to participate. Very big difference.
Couldn't agree more. I think like, first of all, my favorite quote that someone has ever said to me is I said something and they're like, oh, that's from this book. And I'm like, almost everything I talk about is from a book. And they're like, oh, so you're not smart. You're just well read. And I'm like, sure.
Isn't that the same thing? It's basically the same.
That was my response. But anyway,
that's amazing.
Like this concept of participation marketing, like we kind of have this like thesis at FERMAT where it's like culture and commerce are just kind of like bleeding into each other, right?
Yes.
Like what is entertainment, what is commerce, like it all is one and the same. And like for me, that's where participation kind of comes from. And I think it's why like when you're talking channels before, I think it's why D2C has gotten so obsessed with influencers is because like influencers are kind of like in that intermediary step, right? It's like, hey, I, the brand, have the products to sell.
Yeah.
The media outlets have the eyes to sell to. So they provide me with the ad. But like both of those are on like one side of the spectrum. Like the middle is just like, hey, entertainment, education, participation. Like I want to like you're seeing TikTok, like people put together like on the street games and like trivia and like all these things. And like, they're all selling, like everyone's selling something, but it's just like all blended into one thing, like media, culture, commerce. It's all just like one and the same now.
Yeah.
At least that's what I see.
Well, and that's something that Gary Vee, I haven't followed him for quite a long time, but the guy had some really good hot takes there for a little bit, was talking about the fact that like, in today's day and age, you really need to be a media company, right? Like that's what you should be focused on is producing content, which I agree with him 100% because that's how social media works. It's supposed to be social, but the very core of it is media, social media. So I think we forgot as marketers that like content is a huge piece of anything that we're going to be doing in the course of the next 20 years. And if you don't know how to make good content, you're not going to survive. Because this is all about how well can you entertain? How relatable are you as a business? And then what do you provide to this person that's not just a product to solve one problem in their life? Because the brands that do it the best solve multiple problems from an emotional standpoint, like Liquid Death does, and people just purchase it in water form. So it's all about how much can you generate, which again, I get pushback on this because they're like, well, that's expensive. Yeah. Yeah, man, it's expensive to hire somebody to generate content for you, but it's also expensive to run ads. And 50% of that cost is going to waste most of the time, up to 50%. So we got to
interesting when
decide.
people, yeah, it's interesting when people talk about the cost of it, right? Because like,
Yeah.
I don't know, if you're doing proper numbers D2C brand, you have no problem dropping a few $100,000 into Facebook ads over the course of a month, right?
Truth.
So it's like that sounds expensive, but like in that direct response, like, hey, dollar in, dollar out,
Yeah.
that it's easy for me to justify it, where it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I believe that people think like, oh, going like the content route, the media route, like going this way is like expensive. I think it is expensive in time. Like, I don't think it's any more or less expensive than like some of the other ways of doing it. It's just like, I don't know. D2C is obsessed with attribution, and like attribution on a direct response Facebook ad is like pretty clear. Well, harder than it was in the past, but like more clear than I'm going to go do some of these like participation marketing tactics.
Yeah. Well, I can understand the hesitation to do it, mostly because not a lot of brands are doing it, right? Unless you're huge, unless you're a big, big brand that has a lot of budget, it is very difficult to understand how. Give me the tactics behind it. How am I supposed to build a participatory ecosystem for the brand? And a lot of this comes down to creativity. Like, if you don't have someone who's creative on your team, please hire somebody who just loves social media, loves content, just can't get enough of it. Because not only will that benefit you from an organic standpoint, but it will also benefit you from an ad standpoint because you can cross promote them. Like they inform each other. You can't have one without the other. I often see a lot of brands that have no organic ecosystem at all. And I'm like, that's kind of a detriment because your consumers are going to go check to see everywhere else. Even if they see an ad and they like what you do, they're going to check you out, man.
Yeah, I forget who it was. Like someone said something on like one of the social platforms the other day, and now I'm blanking on what but it's basically like brands, what happens when you turn all your ads off.
Yeah.
And it's like, I semi agree with that, semi don't agree with that, where it's like, yeah, like you're going to see how much are you living in someone's head and someone's heart when you're not constantly in front of them, I think is like a pretty good measuring stick. But at the same time, like exposure, like, I don't know, the first time you hear a new song on the radio, you don't love it. You have to hear it over and over and over again to love it. So like familiarity leads to liking leads to purchase.
Yeah. Well, familiarity is based upon obviously like how prevalent are you? Do you have ads running? Do you have organic stuff like going out every single week? So I would tend to agree with you. I'm not saying you should turn your ads off. Please don't do that. Like keep it going. But at the same time, I'm not entirely sure that, again, this goes down to like what marketers believe. I'm not entirely sure that everything we believe is true. I don't know. One of the ones that I'm getting a whole lot of like pushback on. I don't know that we need high frequency of ads. Not frequency, but like volume. I don't know that we need 40 to 50 ads a month to be able to produce the same results. I'm not convinced, mostly because I'm able to produce the same kind of results in 10 ads. So I'm like, I just don't know how many of the things that we believe as marketers is coming from the fact that all of us had an education in direct response. And now I would truly like to just understand, is this accurate? Should we continue to believe that we are doing a massive amount of influencing? Are we actually? I don't know. I just don't know. I read a lot of studies and I don't know about that. Because, based upon how humans work, we're influenced by the dumbest things ever. I mean, it could literally be this plant that caused people to purchase. We have no idea. It's crazy.
It's like, yeah, the creative velocity side of things, right? Like in the ad accounts, like how do I test as much as I possibly can?
Yeah.
And like, I think that it obviously like the more darts you throw at the dartboard, the more likely you are to hit a bullseye, right? But at some point, like you might just be throwing stuff off the dartboard. So like your 10 versus like 60 is like, hey, can I triangulate on something in 10 versus 60?
Yes.
And
yes.
I again, like kind of shameless plug for FERMAT is like, I I wholeheartedly believe that like the reason that you might need to run so many different experiments is because you're trying to just find like small efficiencies, because you're like
Mm.
pushing everything to the same thing. It's like,
Yeah.
if I need to convert someone by
Yeah.
showing them one thing, then I need to try like these 1,000 different things
Yeah.
so that I can find like, oh, a little bit better or a little bit better. But like for what we've been talking about through this whole episode, it's like if I want to go find something new, I don't want to use the word novel because we kind of like talked about like I'm finding
Yeah.
I'm finding something net new to what I normally do, and like that can have a big
Yes.
impact. But like if I'm just constantly throwing everything to like the website that speaks in a particular way,
Yeah.
and I'm only changing the ad and I'm not changing the site, or I'm not changing
Yeah.
like the click experience, is I'm just running a ton of velocity up there to try to find like
Yeah.
small efficiency gains. And I probably
Yeah.
have to do a ton of that to find the
Mhm.
marginal, versus
Yeah.
if I go for something like new and incremental, I don't need to run as much.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I always have to caveat this because everybody's like, well, Sarah doesn't believe in volume at all. That is not correct. I believe in volume only after you know which emotion you're selling. If you have the data to be able to say, yes, we know that our customers buy through security focused messaging, then by all means produce 70 million ads a month all around this security emotion or message. That makes sense to me, right? But most of the time when I'm working with brands, agencies all across the board, all of like the volume that they have when I go in and do audits, it's like the most random spaghetti I've ever seen. And I have to ask them like, what's your strategy here? And their strategy is volume. And I'm like, okay, but like, what's
Shotgun.
your
Yep.
ad strategy? Yeah. And they're like, what do you mean ad strategy? I'm like, so you don't have any strategy for the ads. You just have a strategy for volume of ads. I get confused. But to your point, I really do think that you only need really as many angles to your ads as you have reasons for purchasing. So some brands will have 12 avatars, right? Or 13 or 27 because they have that many reasons for purchasing their product. Some have two. And in that particular respect, you need something, obviously, like what you guys offer, that helps you speak to one specific emotion at a time. Because when you start to blend things together, you just can't tell what's working and what's not.
Yeah, for me, the name of the game in D2C right now is specificity, right? Like
Yeah.
you like your avatar, I call them personas. It's like, yeah, I have 3 personas, and within each of these personas, there's like 4 key value props that these guys care about. And like the way I always talk about it is like, I just had a conversation. We were talking about remote control cars, and we were saying like a remote control car can be for a collector, it can be for a child, it can be for like someone who races these on the weekend and is like super into it. If I put ads together to go after that performance our remote control car driver, and then they come to the site and the site's showing like kids in a parking lot messing around with like peace, like that, I'm not here for like games. I'm here for perform. Like again, it's like everything's based on like that emotion. Like how do I want to be perceived? What's my community? What's my tribe? And like specificity from like ad all the way through. Like for me, that's like the most important thing right now.
Yeah. That's the reason why too. I always tell people try and find an emotion that fits several different like markets. Try and find that one emotion that works. And then again, after you test it in an ad form, decide whether that's the personality of the brand. And if it is, then you can run a bunch of different landers and a bunch of different emotions and all kinds of different spaces and yada, yada. Then you can open up omni-channel and you can open up retail. You can go and get influencers because you know what you have to say. Don't just like say stuff. Because that's when you get to the point where you're like, I don't even know what we're supposed to be doing right now. I'm trying to cut down on confusion because the more concise you are and the more committed you are to your message, the better it works.
Love it. Sarah, before I let you go, people want to keep tabs on. So one, definitely follow Sarah on Twitter. I'll make sure that her Twitter handle gets into the show notes. Fantastic follow. Where can people kind of learn more, follow you, keep tabs on what you're up to?
I am basically everywhere at Sarah Levinger, SarahLevinger. Oh gosh, I have a long name. Anyways, so at Sarah Levinger, except for I don't know what it was about Instagram. I couldn't get my handle on Instagram, so I'm like at Sarah.Levinger over there. I'm super kind of upset.
Oh no.
I'm like, what other Sarah Levinger is there? I'm just kidding. Anyways, you can also go to my website. I have a ton of like articles and blog posts and things that kind of dissect these deeper psychology tactics around pricing psychology and gamification and all kinds of other different things. So if you want to go read those, you can. I have a newsletter that comes out sometimes every Thursday, most of the time every other Thursday right now, but as often as I can. Yeah, go follow me, come hang out. I could talk about this stuff all day. So
amazing. We'll get all of that into the show notes if you guys want to follow along. Sarah, amazing. We said it was a Friday. We didn't know where this was going to go.
We did
went
it. It
to
was
some
great.
amazing places. We did it.
Yeah, it was a good conversation. Thank you for having me.